So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maia Nuku, who is the Associate Curator of Oceanic Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And today she is going to be focusing on art of the Pacific. And we're going to be hearing some teaching strategies and clever ways to think through some of these ways that we can continue to reframe our survey classes. As always, if you have questions, I encourage you to please put them in the Q&A versus the chat. It's just easier for us at the end when we will ask Maia some questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to her, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and great to be with you today for this lunchtime seminar for Smarthistory. And yes, I'm going to be focusing on oceanic art today, and I wanted to think about the power of adornment and art and agency, specifically with reference to Oceania. Now, as a brief introduction to the region, I just frame it for you. So Oceania is indeed a very complex region of the world. The Pacific Ocean is the largest geographical feature on the planet, and it does cover over a third of the Earth's surface. So the region is really home to a kaleidoscopic range of artistic traditions. And at the Met, I look after a collection of over 1,800 works of art from the region. And that encompasses 223 cultures from 31 nations within the Pacific region. That's not a comprehensive collection, but it does cover quite a large swathe of the region we're talking about. And this is just a selection of some of the real highlight works in the collection. And just wanted to show you that just to so we can appreciate, the range of works that we're thinking about. The collection has monumental architecture from the region and spectacular ritual and ceremonial artworks, masks such as this turtle shell mask from the Torres Strait Islands, which is the second row from the left, the image on the top, and indeed this wonderful breastplate or tema from Santa Cruz Islands, which is beneath it, which is what I'm going to focus on in our time today. Just so that we can locate ourselves a bit more closely, the islands that I'll mention today are New Ireland, which is north and east of New Guinea. New Guinea is the large bird-like bird-shaped island to the top left of this image above Australia. And you'll see an archipelago called the Solomon Islands, which is called out to the right of New Ireland. So we're talking about works of art from Melanesia. That is a term that I'm trying to move away from. There's a tripart division of the Pacific into three broad culture areas or groups. And those are Melanesia, Micronesia for the many tiny coral atolls of the North Pacific in Micronesia, and Polynesia, which indeed are the poly or many islands, which are within a notional triangle that extends over the eastern part of the Pacific, not in this map. And that's isolated by Hawaii to the north, Easter Island or Rapa Nui out to its furthest extremity to the east, and then Aotearoa, New Zealand to the bottom. So that's Polynesia. So we have Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, and they're not fully satisfactory as terms because they were imposed on the region. 1831, Dumont d'Urville, the French explorer, concocted that tripartite classification. And because it is a European imposed and a kind of Eurocentric way of making sense of the region, I'm trying to move away from using it. So another useful way to think about it is to think about near Oceania and remote Oceania. And recent genetic and linguistic and archaeological research in the region has really found this to be a bit more of a useful distinction. And really what we're doing there is thinking about a first wave of migration into the region about 50,000 years ago. And the ancestors of today's Papuan-speaking groups and Australian Aboriginals walked across land bridges in what was continental Sahul when the ice caps were still intact. So there's a lot more land. There's land between the top of Australia in this map and the bottom of New Guinea. So people actually are walking across Sahul, settling in Australia, and then indeed some are walking across to New Guinea into the highlands region of the interior mountainous region of New Guinea. And we really refer to that as near Oceania. They also settle some of the Bismarck archipelago, so these archipelagos up to the north and east of Papua New Guinea in the map there. And then there's a boundary which just comes to the between the Solomon Islands and the Santa Cruz Islands to its right. And that's really where we start to delineate a second wave of migration. They come into the region from island Southeast Asia, the Austronesian speaking groups, and they settle the coastal areas of New Guinea and then move further out to these surrounding archipelagos. And indeed from there, over time, there are a series of migrations moving eastward and deploying the remarkable ocean navigation and double hull outrigger canoe sailing techniques, which means that these peoples can push out and across beyond the horizon. So they're not really making short journeys on boats. They're really pushing out across to settle islands and then make return voyages. So that's the distinction that I want to be using a bit more now. So near Oceania and remote Oceania. And just thinking a bit further about, how we are reframing Oceania in the discipline, and indeed how I'm doing it at the museum. We are engaged in a major renovation of the Michael C. Rockefeller wing in the museum. And what I've just spoken about is one thing that I'm trying to do when I design and think through creating these new galleries. And another way is to really think less about the specifics of names and geography of island groups, and more about giving people a sense that it's the ocean that really connects all of the cultures whose art is displayed in the galleries that I look after. And if we start to think about the ocean as a connecting highway, so this is really paraphrasing some of the ideas that Epeli Hauofa, who was a poet and a writer, an anthropologist by trade, who was born in Tonga, raised in Papua New Guinea, and became a citizen of Fiji. He founded the Center for Oceania at the University of the South Pacific in Fiji. And he was really very influential in terms of reframing Oceania as a place in which island peoples were linked together in this very dynamic network of exchange and encounter, and that indeed all the cultures were bound by a common ancestry and genealogical ties. And this framing continues to be very useful as we think through the distinctions and similarities across the art on display in the galleries, and indeed some of the things that we'll look at today. So some really kind of big picture ideas for the Pacific. I am constantly distilling all of the thinking that I do about art in Oceania to these key themes, and these are at the core really of interpreting art from the region. And these are ideas about voyaging. Clearly that's a practical and kind of literal meaning in terms of the settlement and migrations that have taken place across this vast region and the distinctive cultures that have evolved and grown from that migration over space and time. That's the practical and literal thinking for voyaging. We also have the notion of spiritual voyaging. Many of the artworks in the galleries or, at the Met have this sense of mobility kind of built into them. And I want to be thinking about art in terms of it being a vessel or a vehicle. Ancestry is another really key idea for oceanic art. And a lot of the way that I think about the collection is really about foregrounding these genealogical links. How do we think through and convey ideas about this close kinship between humans and the ocean and land environments in which they have grown up in and created these spectacular art traditions? There's a relationship, a very close and direct one that goes right back to the creation stories and cosmogonies in each and every one of the islands within the Pacific. That really reinforces the fact that there is not a distinction between man and the marine and bird and animal life that surrounds him. So there's this very close connection, and indeed it's a genealogical one. It's actually a close kinship with the ocean and the land. And finally, agency. This is just running through throughout the art from the region. And I like to think of a lot of the artworks in the collection really as mnemonics to activate storytelling in the present day. So there's also, underscoring this idea of agency, another idea about time and the cyclical nature of time, but indeed how you can pull up the past into the present and how that could guide you into the future. So the oral histories that are embedded in the artworks themselves are really key. So these are just useful ways of beginning to think about some of the useful ways to interpret and understand meaning and significance and the particular unique aesthetics of art in Oceania. Now I want to just talk briefly about this cup or this pendant, which I'm showing at the bottom of this particular screen. And caps are worn by men throughout the islands of coastal New Guinea. This is a very fine example of one from New Ireland that's in the Met's collection. And men wear cap at large gatherings or community events, and they are essentially a disc-shaped ornament typically fashioned from the shell of the tridacna or the giant clam, and from they're overlaid with a delicate filigree of turtle shell, which has complex designs carved into it. And attached to a fibre band, they can be worn as a head ornament or incorporated into belts and armbands, or indeed worn around the neck as a large pendant. Now, these elaborate shell discs were traded and exchanged throughout the region, and they're still highly valued today for their beauty and use as exchange goods. And the size and quality of a man's cap generally indicated his social status, his personal wealth, and prestige. So the white disc is ground from the shell of the clam, and it was used as currency in the region. So the bigger, more prestigious shells are rarer, and they take more time to polish and embellish, and they're therefore more valuable. So another aspect which is really key in interpreting cap is to understand that they're not merely decorative. The designs on that turtle shell carved overlay are far from purely decorative. They actually relate to to power and provide a means of protection. So they're like a spiritual armature, if you will, and a safeguard against the ill intentions of others. That is one interpretation. But I have found a great, a colleague actually based in UCL in London, Graham Weir, who wrote a great book, Lines That Connect. He's done a lot of research into that focuses really on pattern and design and its deeper and conceptual meaning in the Pacific. And these cap are actually revealed at the end of Malangan ceremonies to communities in a dramatic finale, which ends a long series of mortuary ceremonies, which are known as Malangan. And Malangan carvings are famous throughout the Pacific, widely collected from the 19th century onwards, mainly by German collectors. We indeed have a collection at the Met that we care for. And at the end of these Malangan ceremonies, which are mortuary ceremonies which assist the spirit of the recently deceased to pass through and enter into the ancestral realm, these cap are revealed. And they're revealed to the gathered community for dramatic effect. And they're really an expression of land and genealogy. And the reason that it's important that you would reveal this newly carved turtle shell overlay to this disc would be so that the village can reckon with the death of a significant member of the community and can organize itself anew according to the lineages and affiliations across the local area which have been disturbed. So cap can be interpreted in a very specific way in this example as an emblem which really acknowledges an individual's relationship to the land. And Graham Weir's research shows that the specific numbers of concentric circles in the design really indicate the speaking rights of the individual who wears it. And so it therefore speaks to his elevated status. And it's almost as if it's establishing that he has the right to speak to the group on behalf of his community. And in this sense, and this is the key that is really distinct for Oceanic art, is that it's the cap design is really making visible a wealth of intangible knowledge. So it's viewed and seen by local people, and these designs can be read and interpreted in an appropriate fashion. So the disc really renders the descent lines and the web of relationships across the community in a very material, concrete, and tangible way. So it's communicating key aspects of the culture to its members. This breastplate, or tema, is a local variant of the cap that I just showed you for the Santa Cruz Islands. And they are further out to the east of the Solomon Islands. I showed you on the map, they are actually to the east of this border between near and remote Oceania. Personal adornment is one of the most important nodes of artistic expression in the Santa Cruz Islands. For major dance festivals, it's men who don these elaborate and very costly ensemble of ceremonial attire, which consist of ornate dance skirts, plumed headgear, and lavish arrays of ceremonial jewelry. Artists in these islands fashion these items from a diverse array of materials, and they are really, sourced from the local island, and so it's the local resources that are available to them. And they include different types of shell, which are cut into small discs, turtle shell, as we can see here again, and even tiny porpoise teeth, which are gathered into clusters and then worn around the neck for dramatic effect. But it's these highly prized circular breastplates, known as tema, which are the most spectacular. And the breastplate is made again of a giant clam shell disc, the tridacna, and it's overlaid with this very dramatic and abstracted, very delicately worked section of turtle shell, depicting a series of stylized frigate birds whose wings ascend up the through the design of the overlay, and incorporate these 3 pairs of fluid arching forms, which create a dynamic motif of diving sharks or dolphins. Drawn from the ocean environment, the transformation of the hard, marble-like shell to this perfectly shaped orb is really significant here. In a very transient and ephemeral environment in the Pacific Islands, where things are largely fashioned from wood or bark and fiber materials, the rare durability and permanence of this material is a real key aspect, really, of its local value. The large circular disc is also understood to be a reference of the moon. Its surface has this very distinctive kind of mineralized shimmer when it catches the light, and this is a big part of its distinctive aesthetic, which aim to capture the effects of brilliance and shimmer, rendering the body impressive and attractive and creating this very cosmological armature, which enhance the capacity of the individual wearing it to attract and channel the support and well-being of his ancestors. I just want to look again at the turtle shell overlay with you, because it is really a phenomenal piece of workmanship. It's these stylized images of the frigate birds. You'll see the M shape above the forked tail at the bottom. That's the principal frigate bird, and that bold silhouetted image of the frigate bird is surmounted by these pairs of elegantly arching forms, which, as I've said before, they are portraying dolphins or sharks that you can see is determined by their fins. But the carving of this turtle shell is very painstaking and careful work. The shell must first be removed. It's soaked and cut from the turtle and then heated to a high temperature in a damp pit at the base of a fire, which softens and renders the shell malleable so it can be cut into these designs. And there's a single perforation at the center of this disc. So it's drilled into the center, and that allows for a finely woven plait of fiber cord to pass through. And this goes up and over the disc, and it's knotted at the back. And some cap, or indeed these tema you see, have had trade beads and other discs incorporated at the center there. And so this structure, this technique of passing through the cord and securing that turtle shell overlay really gives an element of adaptability to the disc, since that overlay can be changed and updated over time if the owner so wishes. And so that's something to bear in mind, with the explanation that I just discussed with you, which is the fact that as an individual's responsibilities and status changes over time, they can adapt and enhance the designs incorporated into the turtle shell template that's worn on their own personal tema or breastplate. So the materials and iconography for this piece all derive from the natural world, and then when they're worked upon to produce this piece, they really underscore that close connection between islanders and the land, the sea and the sky. All of those domains are referenced separately, but come together and fused together in that single work worn by a leader. So the breastplate, which is one of my favorite works in the collection, is a really masterful fusion of function and form, in which its unique materiality is being leveraged for aesthetic and conceptual, indeed cosmological effect. So we've looked a bit at ideas about materials and technique, and that's always a key aspect of breaking down any work of art in Oceania, because nothing is random in that sense. The materials all speak to underlying ideas about cosmology, and they have specific agency whether they be the turtle shell, which is a rare, valuable, and high status material, has connotations of fertility and productivity, because the turtle kind of returns to the same site to lay its eggs seasonally. And the other important aspect of the turtle is that it really inhabits this liminal space, this threshold between the land and the water, so it is revered. So everything from the kinds of woods, the turtle shell and the species that it's drawn from, the feathers from specific birds, or indeed the frigate bird, which I just mentioned. The frigate bird is a piratical bird. It's hugely iconic across the Pacific, and you can see that winged formation and the forked tail clearly in the sky. It's silhouetted in the sky when you see frigate birds on the wing. And birds in general are hugely important across the Pacific, because the first creator gods are deemed to be birds in many of the islands. So they have this direct relationship with divinity and that first line of ancestral chiefs who are born of bird-like gods. And they're piratical in the sense that they can actually take food whilst on the wing from other birds mid-flight. So they're revered and looked up to and observed closely by Pacific Islanders. And so you'll see frigate birds and the iconography relating to frigate birds find its way into many of the artworks of Oceania. So I want now to think about how those ideas about materials and technique respond to ideas about agency and power. And I thought I'd show here an image of that breastplate as it's worn by a dancer here from Mbanua village on Undende Island, which is in the Santa Cruz group. He is in full ceremonial regalia, and you'll see that breastplate worn on the chest, just like the one we've been looking at. It has a distinctive overlay in turtle shell. But he also has long string necklaces of cut shell discs around the neck, and he has shell armbands on his upper arm, into which have been tucked bands of beaded armbands, and then another carved insignia kind of tucked into that armband. He has armbands and decorations of feathers tied to around his knees for the lower leg, and wristbands of coloured and scented leaves for each hand. The most important or valuable ornament that he's wearing is the nose ornament, or nelo, which is carved from mother of pearl, and that's inserted into the nose and drops down to cover the mouth. And you'll see he has this maro, or apron, of finely woven fibers to make this multi-layered and very dynamic dance skirt, or a napanessa. And indeed these feathered head plumes, which complete the outfit and enhance and punctuate, the fluid movements of the body whilst animated in dance. Many of the dances in Polynesia, in the Pacific rather, do emulate the movements and mannerisms of birds. So it's not unusual to find dancers wearing the attire in their ceremonial regalia that references the feathers. In fact, they almost transform into birds with the movements and the rhythms and beats of that dance. Throughout the coastal archipelagos of New Guinea, body ornamentation then is communicating important information, not only about the origins of these specific cultures, but also about an individual and his place and role within society. The breastplate, for example, is really an indicator of his kinship affiliations, his social status and rank, and his ritual achievements over time, which gives him that status and prestige. So on special or ritual occasions, bodies are ornamented with these finely worked and valuable objects to reinforce status as a visual expression of this affiliation. And it really announces, your place within the broader society. So in this sense, the body is really a vehicle for the channeling of this agency. Artists in the Solomon Islands also make remarkable works which incorporate delicately carved section of mother of pearl or a white chambered nautilus shell. And these are inset into the stained surface of dark wood, such as this wonderful Canoe Prowl figurehead, which is in the Met's collection. Just like the individual bodies of people that we've looked at, canoes in the Western Solomon Islands were lavishly adorned in former times. And the centerpiece of the prow was a distinctive figurehead, such as this one, known as a nguzu nguzu. Other names are a musu musu or a toto isu. But they are essentially finely carved, sculpted, figurines which were attached at the waterline so that they dip into the sea as the canoe rides the waves. And the figurehead serves then as a supernatural protector, ensuring safe passage and a successful expedition. And just to say a little more there about the indigenous aesthetics that are involved in this, the intricate shell inlay you'll see is embellishing the figure's facial features, dramatically outlining the contours of his face. You can see in these sweeping circular swathes around the eyebrows, the cheekbones, and then especially the jaw. The jaw is seen to be understood to be an attribute of the dangerous sea spirits or kokoso that live out in the deep water beyond the reef. So this is a powerful rendering of that jawline and an equally powerful protector spirit who's going to counter the bad spirits or dangers that might await you as you move beyond the reef on your fishing expedition or indeed to a neighboring island. So you'll see also this ear ornament, so the designs in that lighter pearl shell inlay circling that ear plug, which was another item of adornment worn by senior men. So it's that's really highlighting the spiritual efficacy of this figure and enhancing the endeavour of the ocean-going party and all that are riding in this canoe. So this shimmer, which really, this is a very distinct aspect of all Solomon Islands work. You have this shimmer of the shell inlay, which is working in contrast very dramatically against the dark stained wood. And it's an intentional aesthetic effect that really reinforces this idea of ancestral agency and efficacy that we've been talking about. The shimmer animates the carving just as it does the body, indicating the presence of ancestors. And here that figure is again on the Closure Communications poster that will be announcing the new galleries. So he's a really iconic work in the collection. And I just thought I'd wrap up here with this little summary of some of the ideas that we've been thinking about in our time together in this kind of cross-cultural exploration of art and adornment. It's taking these ideas and the way in which bodies and carved objects are modified to specific ends in the Pacific, which is part of a far broader and fascinating narrative about what it is that art does. And I find it hugely instructive, and I think your students will too, to think about the wider impact of art in terms of its ambitions and aims and its objectives. what is it precisely that art does and why? So you could have your students think about the active agency and power of art in relation to these and other things. And it would be productive to have them think about how these beautifully crafted breastplates and cap that I've shown you are displayed in museums. They are often glossed in the literature and in museum labels as jewelry, with this underlying implication that they're merely decorative. So it's useful, I think, to dig into the deeper significance of materials and iconography, the techniques that have been deployed, as well as asking them to think more broadly about the way in which these things might act upon their wearers and producers, the transformative properties of art. These things are not merely passive or static, but they're very active participants in the formation of identity, certainly in the Pacific. But then I think you can take that examples from the Pacific and then relay them into art from the rest of the world. Hugely instructive way to, as a methodology to think about art in its broadest sense. So for Oceania, how might a canoe prow or an elaborate breastplate fit that conceptual idea of a vessel or a vehicle for power and agency, either for an individual or the entire well-being of the clan or community? The question might then be not simply what it look like, how and why it looks like it does, and what does it do? For many centuries, abstract patterning and designs have been a really effective strategy deployed by islanders in the Pacific to focus vital spiritual forces during large communal events. Decorating the body or tattooing it, wrapping it in layers of bark cloth, textiles which are decorated with bold painted designs, or enhancing the body, as we've seen, with visually striking ornaments, are all important ways Pacific people connect with their ancestors and reinforce their descent lines and family lineages. And they're presenting them in this sense in a very tangible way. They're making them visible. They are showcasing them so that people can understand where and how they fit in the fabric of the community, what their obligations and duties and responsibilities are, and to whom. And this really connects the community in an appropriate and well-functioning way. And it's practices like these that reinforce other core cultural values in the Pacific, like balance and symmetry, exchange and reciprocity. So the high status items we've looked at from these island archipelagos off the coast of New Guinea aim at rendering the body impressive and attractive, because showing oneself in one's full resplendence ensures the flow of well-being from one's ancestors. And drawing on the innate potential of those materials, which are wrought from the distinct domains of land, sea, and sky, these things were designed to overwhelm with dazzling brilliance and ensure the natural capacity of an individual. So I can stop there and see if people have some questions.
Let's see, let me bring myself up here. Thank you so much, Maia. This was fantastic. And I learned so much. And let's see, we have one question that's come in. Let me pull it up here. The first question that we have is, could you elaborate actually on the choice of pattern in the tema with the turtle shell, since it was so striking against the brilliance of the clamshell?
Yeah. Is that specifically for this one?
I believe so.
Yeah. So if we look at this, you'll see that bottom figure in that tawny turtle shell overlay has well, let's start from the bottom. It's complicated if I can't, can I show that? Oh yeah, here, you can see my mouse, can you, online?
We can.
Oh great, yeah. So here's the forked tail of the frigate bird, and here are its wings extending out. This is a motif that you'll find a lot in the Pacific, not only in representations like this one, but also on in bark cloth textiles, and indeed many Pacific Islanders have this as a tattooed motif worn on the skin now. But from above that very iconic motif of the frigate bird, you'll see it's echoed in these lines that radiate over and above, and then this overarching wingspan that kind of encapsulates the entire design. But then within that, you'll see these arching crescent shapes that extend all the way up to the top of the piece, and they are pairs of diving dolphins. So you'll see this, diving dolphins, because they're fin. And I mean, it's just a really stunning, beautiful piece. You can see that little forked tail there at the end.
I was so struck by just not only the design, but also when you were talking about the process of flattening the shell and softening, the turtle shell. And I was thinking about the clam shell. I mean, what was involved in doing that? I'm imagining that is it brittle? Like if you chip it and it will break? So what into that?
Yeah, it's very, very hard to work, actually. So you'll know those clamshells they're actually crenellated. They have a double opening, like mouth, which is crenellated, and it's almost a kind of creamy pink surface. So this is a section of that's been cut and then worked down and ground down painstakingly using sand or as an abrasive, but also shark skin as a kind of rasp, so that's just worked and worked and worked for hours and hours to get that perfect orb shape. And you'll see often the grain and texture of the lines within that density of the shell as another aspect of its aesthetic. And it has this mineralized quality, this kind of sheen, which catches the light, which is really wonderful. Yeah, very simple.
Yeah,
it's a very powerful aesthetic, isn't it? It's very simple in its abstraction.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I was thinking about, we're seeing it here on a screen, and it's so hard to see the shimmer that you were talking about as being such a important aspect of the agency of the object and the experience, and it makes me want to go see it. I know things are being reinstalled, but no, it's really wonderful. And we actually have a follow-up question about the repetition. So the idea of, is the issue of repetition a standard motif with, say, the numerous birds, or say the repeating, whether it's dolphins or sharks?
Yeah, that's a really great question and really key. I'm really glad someone's seen that and picked up on it, because in fact, the repetition of design like that is hugely significant and usually refers to a lineage or a descent line. So in fact, you're really thinking about this motif through a deep tranche of space and time, almost like referring to origins. So anytime you see that motif, you get it a lot in carved work in the Pacific, a repeated notching that covers the entire surface of a paddle or an adze with a hafted blade. That's something that really gets elaborated in the Polynesian corpus over time. But essentially anything that and again, you see crested layers of carved figurines. It's a similar endeavor to really speak to this repetition over time. So you're talking about ancestry and lineage and descent from the origin bird, the original bird creator god. So there's this kind of notion of divinity and your status as a direct link to that ancestry is what's being reinforced in that design. So hugely important.
That's so interesting. And I was really struck by the questions that you had at the end there, and really thought-provoking ones about, the idea of, we tend to think of agency coming from just the individual, the person, but the idea of, the tema or the cap objects having this ancestral agency, not just, this very different types of agency was really thought-provoking.
Yeah.
And I really I
There's more of
appreciated those questions.
Yeah, well, personhood and the ideas about personhood are really key. What I was trying to do there is really show this relationship between objects and people. There isn't really a distinction. So these high status objects are referred to once they become heirlooms and they're gifted or passed down to following generations. There is a notion of them being well, often they're named, and then all the events and gatherings of community in which they've been used and or indeed exchanged and or passed on are recalled when they are brought out again and used. And so you have that idea that oral history is really cloaking all these objects. The memories are really incredible. These islands are part of this very complex exchange systems, across these archipelagos. It's hugely, it's fascinating and very complex. But any exchanges that occur, even when you think about Bronislaw Malinowski and his writing on the Kula exchange, so he focused really on the Trobriand Islands and one tiny aspect of exchanges which move in particular directions, and groups travel and they exchange, and all of those exchanges are kind of tallied in the minds of the orators and leaders who are maneuvering and manipulating those exchanges. And so that is all encompassed in the art itself. And so you get this idea about exchange and movement. It's very dynamic, that mobility, not just the people that have moved across this region, the objects move. They're intended to be, there's a mobility kind of inherent in them. I talked about, you could undo this, keep the disc, add something to it, pass it to another person. It could cement an alliance, forge an allegiance. So, just thinking about these as vessels, for or capacity to do things is really, really important.
I love that way of thinking about things, and even just the way that you were encouraging us to reframe how this tripartite division that you mentioned at the beginning, I think is really powerful and important. And I'm excited to see the reinstallation of the galleries, which it looked like it was 2024. Is that?
They'll be back. Yeah.
2024. Okay.
Things now. Yeah. But in a sense, that's the art. Art and anthropology have always had this interesting boundary between them. And a lot of what we're doing in the discipline is just really trying to think about how those two disciplines interact and how they can be productive one to the other. If you think about art history and anthropology and how they can actually really reinforce an understanding of things, it is exciting,
Oh yeah, no, I thank you so much for this. This was wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how you're going to present the galleries in these really wonderful, thought-provoking, reframing ways in, I guess, 3 years.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for today. It was wonderful.
Oh, pleasure. Really nice to meet you and see you all.
Yes, and if other folks have questions beyond this, please feel free to post them in the comments and I can pass them along to Maia. But for now, we'll say goodbye. We're getting lots of thank yous, including one from an AP high school art teacher who's going to share this with her students. So
fabulous.
Thank you so much, Maia. We appreciate it.
Okay,
goodbye to everyone else.
Thanks so much. Bye.